Hey guys, welcome back. I hope last week's session about all things DAT scheduling was helpful and informative. This week we have some exciting stuff. We're talking about all things DAT related. So section by section, we're going to kind of break it down, go through tips that helped me when I was studying. Also, just if you have any questions about study specifics or section specific things that you want more clarity on, definitely feel free to keep commenting on these posts, and I will open up next week's session or DM you if it's more personal with an answer to all of that. And so to jump into it, again, I'm Izzy. Welcome. I'm Isabel. I will be starting my D1 year in the fall in August. And I'm kind of just here to be a resource for everyone who's going through the studying and the applying cycle, to help you and just to really give some insight into how you can succeed. So first I want to start off by kind of following up with how I began last week's. Is everything I'm saying is just from personal experience from me and my friends that have also gone through studying and successfully applying. So this is all anecdotal advice. It worked for us. It doesn't mean that's guaranteed to work for you, but it's definitely somewhere to start. And make sure you stay tuned, because at the end of this, I'll be giving away some giveaways for some prizes and some coupon codes to get some subscriptions to crack the DAT. So without further ado, let's open up this. Okay. So first, section-specific breakdown of the DAT. So first, before we begin, my tips. So just kind of generally overall, I found it to be incredibly difficult to skip questions and come back to them, only because the test is online. So what I mean by that is you're clicking like the next button every time, and then when you click next, it brings you to the next question. And in order to go back to a question, you have to click next like however many times. So say you skip question number 5 and you're on question number 25, you have to click back 20 times to get to that question. You can't like quick jump from questions to questions. So I found that to be really incredibly difficult, and I kind of probably did it a few times when I was studying, but anytime I took a practice test, I definitely did not do it. So I found that it was just a horrible waste of my time, and timing is a really tricky thing on the DAT. So I said find what works best for you, but know that skipping questions is generally difficult, and kind of play with that while you're studying, because that's something to like definitely focus on. Next is timing is tough. You need to fully be actively engaged throughout the entire test. So what I mean by that, and we'll go into the specifics of each section later, but I was super hyper vigilant of how much time I was spending on each thing. Like you can't get into your zone of doing some answers and not be paying attention to the clock because it is really tough throughout the whole test. So you need to make sure you are fully engaged and checking and ensuring that you're on the right track. Also, lastly, obviously, you guys know this, but there's no penalty for guessing. So use process of elimination. That was super helpful because I probably have no way of going about a question, but then I'd look at the answers. And for biology, sometimes those questions are out of the blue. And so I'd be like, I have no idea what the answer is. I'd look at the I'd look at the answers. And then by process of elimination, I would know that I have a 50-50 shot of getting it because I'd narrow it down to 2 that I knew for sure were wrong. And then I'd guess between those the remaining 2. So the first section is Survey of Natural Sciences. So this is kind of frustrating with the DAT, but it's grouped it all into one section, and it's called Survey of Natural Sciences, and that includes bio, gen chem, and orgo. And you have 90 minutes to do all of them, but they're separated, they're clustered, but they're not separated. So once you open Survey of Natural Sciences, you're fully in all of those questions. You can skip. So this is like kind of in response to my first point about how skipping questions is really difficult. Also timing. So in my experience, I found it to be fine if I skipped questions within a section. So for example, if I skipped questions within biology, you have like, I think 30, we'll get to that, 30 questions for biology. Say I skipped question number 20 in biology. As soon as I got to question 30 of biology, I would go back and do question 20. I wouldn't ever like switch my brain into gen chem and go back to bio. I think that that's going to confuse you more. And also you're going to lose a lot of time in trying to trek back through like 50 questions to get to the one biology one you missed. Also another thing, and I think this is like I'm speaking from my personal experience, but I found it hard to switch my brains on and off. So for example, if I had like my bio brain on, I was thinking bio, and then if I went to gen chem and I started doing like math equations, I found it hard to switch back then to bio. So I kind of grouped them in my mind of like, okay, this is my bio, and then I like shut that door and then started doing gen chem. So that's just how I would tackle those questions. So the first one you're going to encounter on the test is biology, which is hopefully good because you take a lot of biology in dental school. So it's 40 questions. Arguably, this is the hardest to study for. So honestly, the best advice I could give anyone for the biology section is just be a sponge. When I was studying, I would keep a notebook. I mean, I ended up filling out like an entire college-ruled notebook. But I'd keep a notebook, and every question I would either get wrong or I would get right, but I know for a fact I guessed on. I didn't know the actual material. I would write the little explanation box of like what it is, or I would Google something and like give myself a better way to remember it for next time. And then every night I would then review those notes. So I would go back and look through those notes to make sure I would just solidify that information in my brain. And then as your notebook grows, you're refreshing on things that you'd gotten wrong like a couple weeks ago, but you're like getting it more ingrained in your mind. So I think that that's really important as well. Also, while it is the hardest to study for and it is a ton of information, you will begin to see patterns. What I mean by that is you'll start to see like there's a lot of chromosomal or parent mitosis, kind of meiosis, cell division. There's plant stuff. There's general facts. Like you just like start to see kind of boxes in which these types of questions will fall into, which is easier to study for. So, for example, I started noticing that I was getting a lot of meiosis cell division questions wrong. So I was like, I kept having to rewrite the cell division thing in my notebook. So then I got to a point where I was like, okay, Izzy, you need to go back and study this because clearly this is something that you don't understand because you keep getting it wrong. And it's repeating itself, which means it's probably a necessary thing to remember. And then I ended up seeing one on my exams. So just stuff like that, what I mean by you will begin to see patterns, which is slightly easier, but just being aware of what the patterns are and make sure you're paying attention to that is always helpful. So general chemistry. So this is 30 questions. Honestly, this was my favorite section, but obviously I'm speaking from my personal, I don't think a lot of people agree with that. So one thing that I found to be super, super intimidating for Gen Chem is that a lot of study guides, study review prep materials give you this like massive 3-page, like tiny writing memorization sheet that has like a million equations that you're like, I literally learned that in sophomore year of high school. Like I don't remember what that is, how to use it, or when I would need to use it. And I found that to be super intimidating. But with my experience, I did like arguably, I think, my best section on Gen Chem. And from my experience, you don't need to memorize that. You just need to practice until you get to the point where you know how to use it. So it becomes second nature. So you technically did memorize it, but you didn't sit there doing flashcards with like PV equals nRT. You were using it enough that you became super familiar with it. And then also I think that really helps in the long run as well, because you're going to encounter the same types of questions. And if you've seen them enough to know what equation to use, when you see them again, you'll know which equation to use. You're not just pulling out of an arsenal of equations you have in your back pocket. You know exactly what you have to do to approach the question. So I think that's really important to not memorize. I had a lot of friends who were sitting there memorizing these massive equation sheets where I was like, oh my God, that's so overwhelming. I'm not going to do that. And then I found that was the best way for me to learn it. This one's also easy to find patterns. So you'll get some gas equation or gas questions. You'll get some equilibrium questions, like stuff like that, where you'll start to see patterns, and then you can again identify ones that you keep consistently getting wrong, or ones that you've seen a lot that you're kind of iffy on, and then you can really tackle that specific targeted area once you notice that pattern. So organic chemistry, this one is honestly all about practice. So one thing I want to preface by saying this is I had a really strong background in organic chemistry, but I was taught in a way that really emphasized the mechanism of the reaction. So when I started studying, really like hell-bent on always trying to figure out the mechanism. So if I had a reaction and said like, what is the product was my question, I would try to work out the reaction to see what product I would get. And even if I didn't know what the product, like what the specific reagent was going to do with the reactant, I would just kind of assume and make a product and then find the answer that fit closely, which worked, but it takes a lot of time. And this is, again, where I'm coming back to the whole point of timing is really key on this test. You don't necessarily need to do the mechanism every time, and I quickly realized that because I was spending so much time doing the mechanisms. I wasn't able to dedicate the same amount of time to every question. I'd have to rush through the end of them. So I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to start looking for the trends of basic, acidic, what happens, this kind of equation, this kind of equation, this kind of reaction. And that was ultimately more successful for me on the actual test day because it saved me some time and I wasn't, drawing out, wasting my paper, etc. But again, that's ultimately just practice, knowing the trends. There's a lot of good resources too out there for Orgo of how to like quickly identify trends and how to tackle them. So then you go straight from the natural sciences to the PAT. So the PAT is a harder section to study for, but really are like honestly kind of fun because it's kind of a mental break. Like you don't have to be memorizing or really straining yourself. You just need to get practice and get better at it and get quicker at it. So there's 90 questions. You have an hour to do it. So the timings could be especially tough here. So you really have to be aware of the clock. So for example, I don't remember which section I would spend it on, but I remember studying and just getting so not overwhelmed, but keyholes. I think that was the section. I would get super fixated on trying to fit my shape into each keyhole and see if it worked instead of just like taking the overall trend and picking which one I thought it was. So I think that's tough. So I had to just honestly keep checking in with myself. So every few questions I'd be like, okay, how much time have I spent on that? Okay, I have 20 more minutes. I need to get going. Like I need to pick up myself. And again, that's going to come with your timing of the overall section of the PAT is going to come with practice of taking those full length tests because you need to do each one individually, each one of these types of questions individually so you get better at it. But how you flow between like keyholes and TFE to angle ranking is going to really determine what your pace is. So for example, angle ranking was one of the easiest sections for me. So I would blow through those angle ranking questions. So I knew I didn't have to be as far along in the time when I got to that section because I could blow through those questions. But I knew that like pattern folding was going to take me a little while. So I wanted to leave like an X amount of time when I got to that section. So just being able to really critically figure that out, your timing wise of how you're going to tackle those sections is really important to how you're going to do. So yeah, be aware of the clock. And then obviously here are our types of questions: keyholes, TFE, angle ranking, hole punching, cube counting, pattern filling. So there are a lot, I know for a fact, a lot of resources out there of different students, successful students, telling you how to tackle these types of questions. And honestly, I think that I watched a lot of them, and I think that some were super helpful, some were very unhelpful, and some I just really did not vibe with. So I would see what they were saying, I would recognize it, and I would say that is so, I can't see that, I can't visualize what you're telling me to visualize. And then other people, as I would be like, wow, that's really insightful, like I really definitely use that, or that really changed my approach on these types of questions. So each one of these kind of has a few different ways of tackling them. And I would say try your best to be open to different types. If you're doing something incredibly well, don't change it. But if you're not doing something super well, or you think that you could do something better, definitely be open to different types of approaches, because these types of questions are challenging, and the more you can get exposure to different ways, the more you'll find your groove and you'll find your way. With that being said, I'm happy to give my suggestions of how I tackled these types of problems. Although I know there are a bunch of resources out there, I'm happy to give you my approach, but definitely just leave that in the comments and question or whatever. I'm happy to talk to whomever about that as well. Okay, so the next part of it is an optional break. So it's 30 minutes long. You can take however much time you want, which I think is awesome, because I remember when I was taking standardized tests in the way back when, other standardized tests, I was always annoyed that I had to take these breaks, because I felt like I was just standing outside, like more anxious to take the test than I was to take the break. So I think I honestly think I went to the bathroom, ate a banana because I wanted to like make sure I had some fuel, and then went back in there. Had some water and then went back in. I definitely did not take the 30 minutes. I probably took 5, 10, if anything. But with that being said, if you need the 30 minutes and you want the time to refix your mind, get your mind right, and then go back in, you have the time to do so. So make sure you just really, also the other thing too, since it is a computerized test, you have to make sure you're back in there at 30 minutes, because it will like restart. It counts down your optional breaks. You need to be super hyper aware of that timing. You don't have you have a proctor, but you don't have a proctor proctoring your specific test only. They're proctoring other tests because it's like a prometric testing center. So you have to be really cognizant of what time you're taking, because you need to go back in there and restart the exam, because it's counting down for you. So then you get back in there and you're taking reading comprehension. So reading comprehension is a really tricky section to explain ways to do well on, because every learner has a different level of success and skill with reading comprehension. And I think that there's a bunch of different ways. So first it's 50 questions, 60 minutes. So it's grouped by passage. So what that means is I don't remember. I think it's 3 or 4, maybe 3 or 5. There's a passage, and then you have like 5 questions for that passage, and 5, 6 questions for that passage, and then you move to the next passage. So what I mean by learning styles and learning ability from reading is some people read. So some people they read really quickly, and they can sit there and bang through the entire thing, read it all, and then answer all the questions. I can't do that. I read very slowly. So I tried skimming, where I would skim it and then answer the questions and kind of go back to the passage. And that was working well, but I was still taking a lot of time to skim, because I wasn't fully skimming. I was actually more reading than skimming. And then the last one is not reading at all. You just go to the questions. So then I started doing that one, where I would go to the question, and then I would skim to find the area in which that question would be answered, and then I would read. So I kind of did like a combination of everything, but that was the thing that was the approach that worked the best for me, because I was able to figure out how exactly to tackle that kind of question. But that was, again, from trial and error with my own experience. So the best thing I can suggest for here would be to kind of figure out go through those 3 different approaches and then figure out which one works best for you and which one's time effective for you, because I think that that's going to be a totally individualistic thing to approach. So then the next section is quantitative reasoning. So quantitative reasoning, again, I think I loved quantitative reasoning, but I think it's one of those sections that can be really challenging because it's a lot of random math that, unless I tutored middle-age and high school-age kids in SAT math as well as all math subjects, so I had actually been exposed to a lot of this type of math recently, so that's why I was better prepared than I think I would be if I didn't do that. But with that being said, it is a section that, again, if you practice, you will be able to succeed on. But ultimately, it's 40 questions, 45 minutes, which I think is a good ratio because of my last point. The questions are not as hard as you are making them to be. So I found myself spending a lot of time when I would be doing these questions fixating on different ways to do it, equations I should be using, theorem. Like I was doing so much extraneous work to try to come up with an answer that I was fitting to somehow be. And I would sit there and I was like, oh, this is so complex. And then I remembered that we don't have a calculator. This can't be that hard of math. This can't be that hard of an equation. This can't be that hard of a question. So, and they're giving you about 1 minute to do it. So I was like, really had to reevaluate, okay, well, you're definitely making this way harder than it needs to be. And I think once I was able to kind of restructure my brain in that way, I was definitely more able to come up with the right answer often, because ultimately you don't have that much time. So the questions also aren't grouped, which is, I think, nice, because then you kind of just get your brain on for math and you just kind of do them. Whereas sometimes in biology, for example, if you are struggling with biology in that moment, you have to do 30 questions of biology before you move on. So it's kind of frustrating. Whereas this is a bunch of different types of questions being thrown in together, which is honestly nicer. So other thing I said is use the paper. So you get a laminated sheet of graph paper, which is very frustrating within itself because you write with a Sharpie. So every time you have to change your piece of paper, you have to hold it up and someone has to come look at that paper and then give you a new laminated piece, which I think is a colossal waste of time. But that's how they do it to ensure no cheating on the test. But with that being said, writing things out, because, okay, this is the other thing that I kind of got frustrated with. I would always think that because I don't have a calculator, I should be able to do this math in my head, right? Or I should be able to figure this problem out in my head, which is a natural progression because if you don't have a calculator, you should be doing math in your head. But that's how you get a lot of really silly mistakes, and that's how you come into a lot of problems when you're losing track of which variable you use or which number you should be using, which number you came up with via multiplication in your head, stuff like that. So it's really easy to lose track of the numbers that you're keeping in your head if you aren't writing them on paper. Also, just writing things out. There's a lot of like conceptual sort of problems too, where there's shapes or angles, and just being able to write it out or draw it out or map it out. If there's there's a train going this way or that kind of problem, being able to draw that out and really visualize it is also, I think, super helpful. So do not be afraid to use the paper. I used like probably front and back of 3 pieces of paper, just in the quant reasoning section. So I think that that's really important too. So we made it to the end, which is awesome. Feel free also to keep leaving your comments and your questions. I'm really here to be as much of a resource as I can be. So it's really important that you keep asking those questions and you keep really making this an interactive session, just so that, you know, we feel like I feel like I'm being as helpful as I can be to you guys and your whole process. I know how stressful it is, and I know how challenging it is, and I also know how alone you can feel while doing it. So I really just want to be here to like help and offer as much assistance as I can. So with that being said, we have some giveaways because you guys watched to the end. First, there's another 50% off winner. congratulations last week to our 50% off winners. So we're doing it again this week. I will pick from the people who are continuing to watch now, and then I will DM that person and reach out. And also, everyone, since you all watched this whole session and were a part of this learning experience, you get a 10% off code to use from today until next Tuesday. The code is here. It's BEST DAT Prep 10. Feel free to share it with your friends. Post it on. Share with your friends, give it to everyone. Just make sure you're signing up for those subscriptions, because honestly, like I said, practice. So the more availability you have to resources to get that practice in, the better. So make sure you're still using that and you're getting it. So I'll stay on here so I can keep letting the questions roll in, and then I'll get a little sign off, and we can get excited for next week's. Log back in next week, and I look forward to seeing you guys then. Keep letting me know if you have any questions at all, and I will be happy and thrilled to answer them and just continue to be a resource. Bye.